My son-in-law wanted to move his parents into my new house in the woods, so I prepared a surprise. The house wasn't just a house. It was the last piece of a dream I had built with my late wife, Helena. Every board, every nail had a story. My father always taught me that a man should have a place that is his refuge, a place he can always return to, and that was mine. I, Roberto, at 65, had finally finished it. It was a wooden house with a large porch overlooking the tall trees and the stream that ran nearby. It was my sanctuary of peace. My son-in-law wanted to steal my refuge, but I had a surprise in store for him and his parents. Want to know what I did with my sanctuary? Subscribe and like to find out. My son-in-law, Daniel, never understood that. For him, it was all about convenience and opportunity. He and my daughter, Anna, lived in the city an hour away. When he saw the house ready, his eyes didn't shine with the beauty of the place, but with the cold calculation of possibilities. "It's too big for one man," he said one day with that smile that never reached his eyes. "My parents, Carlos and Marta, are getting old. Their apartment has stairs. It would be perfect if they came to live with you. They would keep each other company." The proposal sounded almost noble if you didn't know the tone behind it. He wasn't concerned about his father-in-law's loneliness or his parents' well-being. He wanted to get rid of the responsibility for them by placing it on my shoulders and in my home. My daughter, Anna, just stared at the floor, uncomfortable. She had always been more heart than reason, and Daniel knew how to manipulate that. I saw the struggle in her eyes. She loved me, but she also loved her husband and didn't want to cause conflict. So to everyone's surprise, I smiled and agreed. "That's a great idea, Daniel. Let's bring them here. I'll get everything ready." Daniel was visibly pleased, as if he had just won a game. Anna hugged me, relieved, thanking me for being so understanding, but they didn't see the ice forming inside me. Understanding? No, I was just beginning to construct my response. The first thing I did was call an old friend, Ricardo, who was a lawyer. I explained the whole situation to him without hiding any details. Ricardo listened carefully and at the end said in a serious voice, "Roberto, you need to protect what is yours, legally. Let's get everything documented so there's no doubt about who owns what." Following his advice, we spent the next week preparing documents that reaffirmed my total and unquestionable ownership of the property and everything in it. It was paper armor, but it would be stronger than any brick wall. Meanwhile, I began to prepare the physical surprise. Behind the main house, there was an old workshop that I used to store tools. It was a small but solid building. Over the next few weeks, I worked on it non-stop. I replaced the roof, installed new windows, laid a wooden floor, and built a small bathroom and a compact kitchen. I painted the walls a clean white and put in simple but comfortable furniture, a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a sofa. I turned the workshop into a small guest house, perfectly functional and independent. To Daniel and Anna, I said I was cleaning up the yard and organizing the tools. They never came to check. They were too busy planning Daniel's parents' move. One night they came over for dinner. While Anna helped me in the kitchen, I heard Daniel talking on the phone with his mother, Marta, on the porch. He spoke softly, but the night wind carried his words to me. "Yes, Mom, everything is fine." The old man agreed to everything. "In a few weeks, you'll be in the main house. It's huge. After we settle in, we can see what to do with his old stuff. Maybe put it in the basement. Little by little, we'll organize everything our way." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about convenience. It was a power grab. They wanted to push me into a corner of my own life, turn me into a tenant in my own home. At that moment, any shred of doubt I had about my plan disappeared. War was declared, even if only I knew it. Moving day arrived. A small truck pulled up in front of my house. Daniel jumped out of the cab, smiling from ear to ear. His parents, Carlos and Marta, got out of the car right behind him, looking at the main house with greedy eyes. "It's even more beautiful in person," said Marta, clutching her purse to her chest. Carlos just nodded, already measuring the size of the porch. Anna was there too, looking a little nervous but trying to smile. "Welcome," I said as calmly as I could muster. "I'm glad you came. I've prepared a special place for you." Daniel patted me on the back. "I knew you'd understand, Roberto. Come on, guys, let's take the boxes inside." He started walking toward the front door of my house. "Wait a minute," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't where you're going. Come on, follow me." The confusion on their faces was the first payment of my revenge. I led them down the stone path that led to the back of the property. When we stopped in front of the old workshop, now a charming little house, I opened the door and announced, "Here it is, your home." The silence was heavy. Daniel was the first to break it. "What kind of joke is this? This is a shed." "It's not a shed," I replied calmly. "It's a fully functional guest house. It has everything you need. Kitchen, bathroom, a comfortable bedroom, and most importantly, privacy." Marta looked at the little house with disgust. "You expect us to live here? In this little room?" "I hope you appreciate the gesture," I continued, my tone hardening. "You wanted to live on my property, and I found you a place. On my property." That's when Daniel exploded. "This is an insult." The agreement was the big house. We're staying in the big house. No, I said, and for the first time, my voice came out with all the weight of my pent-up anger. No one is staying in my house. The house I built for my wife. The house that holds my memories. You are not going to turn my home into a storage facility for your belongings and your convenience. I took a folder from under my arm, and just so there's no doubt, my lawyer, Ricardo, prepared this. I handed him a copy of a document. This is a legal notice. You are welcome to stay in this guest house as my guests for a limited time. Any attempt to enter or occupy the main house will be treated as trespassing. Daniel's face turned from red to white. He looked at the paper, then at me, completely speechless. Carlos and Marta seemed to have shrunk. Their arrogance vanished like smoke. My daughter Ana began to cry softly. She finally understood. She saw her husband's greed and the trap I had so patiently set. The confrontation she had so feared was happening, and it was worse than she had imagined. Daniel crumpled the paper and threw it on the floor. You're a crazy, bitter old man. Let's get out of here. We don't need your handouts. He grabbed his parents by the arm and dragged them back to the car. Before getting in, he turned to Ana. Are you coming or staying with him? Ana looked at her husband, then at me. I saw the conflict tearing at her soul, but to my relief, I saw something new in her eyes. Disappointment. Disappointment with the man she had married. She shook her head. I need some time, Daniel. He scoffed, got in the car, and drove off, tires screeching on the dirt road. The moving truck followed close behind. I stood there with Ana crying beside me, watching the dust rise on the road. I felt no joy, only a cold, heavy relief. I had won, but at a cost. The silence of the woods returned, but now it seemed different. Later, Ana and I sat on the porch. She apologized, said she had been blind. I forgave her, for she was my blood, the last piece of Helena I had left. The road to rebuilding our trust would be long, but it would start there. I looked at my home, my refuge, and felt my father's presence. I had protected my legacy. The surprise had been bitter but necessary, and peace, though tinged with sadness, was finally mine again. That night, the silence of the woods seemed amplified. Every crack of a branch, every murmur of the stream sounded like a judgment. Ana cried for a long time, a silent cry that wet the sleeve of my shirt. I just held her, feeling the weight of each tear. There were no words of comfort that could erase the ugliness of that day. When she finally calmed down, she looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Father, I'm sorry. I was so blind. So weak. I shook my head. You weren't weak, Ana. You wanted to believe in the best of the person you loved. That's not weakness, it's hope. The mistake was his for using your hope against you. We stood there saying nothing more, as night swallowed the last light of day. Victory had a bitter taste of loss. Ana stayed with me for 3 days. They were strange days, filled with long silences and short conversations. We moved around the house like two ghosts, each lost in our own thoughts. I saw her looking at the pictures of Helena, at the furniture we had chosen together, and I understood her pain. She hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the image of the family she had dreamed of building. I made breakfast and we ate on the porch, looking at the trees. I talked about birds, about the wood I used to build the deck, about anything that wasn't the chasm that had opened between us and Daniel. I wanted to give her a safe space to breathe, away from the storm that her life had become. On the third day, during breakfast, she looked at me with a new determination in her eyes. I need to go, Dad. My heart sank a little. Go where? To the city, not to our apartment. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while, but I need to sort this out. I can't hide here forever. I saw in her a piece of Helena's strength and felt a painful pride. You're not hiding. You're healing, I said, but I understand. Do what needs to be done. Just know that this house is your home, always. She stood up, hugged me tightly, and for the first time in days, her embrace didn't feel fragile. She was putting herself back together. The following weeks were deeply lonely. The phone didn't ring. No messages from Daniel, not for me, nor, as I later learned, for Ana. It was as if he had erased us from his life, along with his failed plan. I kept myself busy with routine tasks. I tended the garden, did small repairs around the house, walked in the woods. The little guest house in the back was a constant presence. Every time I looked at it, I felt a chill. It was a monument to my revenge, proof that I had been pushed into a dark place. I didn't regret it, but I didn't celebrate it either. It was a scar on my property, a reminder of the war I had to fight to have peace. About a month later, Anna's car drove up the dirt road again. When she got out, she looked different. Thinner, perhaps, but with straighter shoulders. She carried a small box with a few belongings. We sat on the porch and she told me everything. She said she tried to talk to Daniel. He didn't apologize. On the contrary, he accused her of betrayal, of choosing a stubborn old man over her own husband.
He said you manipulated me, Dad, she said with a humorless laugh. He can't see. For him, everything is a power game. Who wins, who loses. He said my parents raised him to be a winner. She continued, her voice firm. I told him that a winner doesn't try to steal his father-in-law's home. A winner doesn't humiliate his wife in front of his family. I told him that the love I felt for him died that day, in front of that little house. She took a deep breath. We're getting a divorce.
I've already talked to a lawyer. He was furious, said I would regret it, that I would be nothing without him. But for the first time, his threats didn't scare me. I reached out and held her hand. It was cold, but firm. "You're stronger than you think, Anna. You always have been." She looked at the box beside her. Can I stay in the little house for a while? Just until I find a new place for myself. I know it's strange, but it feels like the right place. The place where everything changed. The irony of the situation did not escape me. The weapon I had built to defend myself would become my daughter's refuge. "Of course you can," I replied without hesitation. "It's yours for as long as you need it." That afternoon, I helped her move her things there. As we arranged her clothes in the small closet and her books on the little table, the place was transformed. It ceased to be a symbol of conflict and began to feel like home, a new beginning. In the evening, she cooked in the small kitchen and we had dinner together on the porch of the main house. The silence between us was no longer heavy but comfortable. We talked about the future, about her plans to maybe go back to school, about my desire to build a small boat to use on the lake a few miles away. After dinner, while we were washing the dishes, she stopped and said, "You know, Dad, I've always loved this house because it was your and Mom's dream. But now I really understand. It's not about the wood or the land. It's about having a place in the world that no one can take away from you, a place that holds who you are." Her words struck me deeper than any victory. I hadn't just protected walls and a roof. I had shown my daughter the value of protecting herself, of defending her own soul. That night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee coming from the main house. Anna was already up, smiling at me from the kitchen. The sadness was still in her eyes, but there was a new light there too, a light of resilience. The road ahead would be long for her and for us. Trust is like an ancient tree. It takes years to grow and can be knocked down in an instant. But there, that morning, with the sun streaming through the window and the sound of my daughter humming in the kitchen, I felt that we had planted a new seed. The peace I had sought so long was no longer lonely. It was shared, and because of that, it was much stronger. The months that followed were like a long, slow dawn after a stormy night. Anna's presence in the little house at the back changed the energy of the place. What had once been a battle plan, a silent fortress, became an annex of life. I would see her in the morning, sitting on the steps with a cup of tea, looking out at the woods, with a calmness I hadn't seen in her for years. We created a simple routine. We had dinner together every night on my porch. We talked little about the past and a lot about the present, about the taste of the bread I had baked, about a different bird we saw in the creek, about the stars that seemed brighter away from the city lights. Little by little, the daughter I feared I had lost was coming back. Not the naive girl who let herself be led by her husband's wishes, but a woman who was learning to listen to her own voice. I didn't pressure her with questions about the divorce or Daniel. I just offered my silent presence, a safe haven where she could anchor herself while her wounds healed. Sometimes I would find her tending to the small garden Helena had planted near the workshop. She would pull weeds with fierce concentration, as if she were cleaning not only the earth but also her own soul, and I understood. Each of us has a garden to tend to. The peace, however, was fragile. One day, an official letter arrived for Anna. It was from Daniel's lawyer. We sat at the kitchen table while she read the document, her face growing paler and paler. Daniel wasn't making things easy. He claimed he was entitled to a share of the property, arguing that he had invested expectations and planning in the house, believing it would be his family's future home. It was a blatant lie, an attempt to hurt me through my daughter. "He can't do that, can he, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. I called Ricardo right away. I explained Daniel's new maneuver. On the other end of the line, I heard my friend give a dry laugh. "Roberto, he can try whatever he wants, but he won't get anywhere. The documents we prepared are bulletproof. The property is yours and yours alone. His claim is absurd based on conversations and not on facts or contracts. Tell Anna not to worry. Her lawyer will easily overturn this. Daniel is just kicking and screaming, trying to cause pain because he's lost control." Ricardo's words were a relief. I hung up the phone and relayed the message to Anna. She took a deep breath, but I could see that Daniel's attempt had shaken her. That man was like a persistent shadow trying to darken any light she found. A few weeks later, the home phone rang in the late afternoon. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a tearful, familiar voice sounded on the other end. It was Marta. "Roberto, please don't hang up," she pleaded, her former arrogance replaced by a tone of forced supplication. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. We didn't know. Daniel deceived us. He said you agreed to everything, that you were happy to have us." The excuse was so weak that I almost laughed. "Marta," I replied calmly, "you saw the house. You saw how big it was. And at no point did you ask where I would stay. You weren't deceived. You were accomplices." She began to cry louder. "You don't understand. Our life has become hell. Daniel is intractable, blaming us for everything that went wrong. We had to move to a tiny place. Carlos is not in good health. You destroyed our family." The accusation hit me, but not with guilt. It hit me with the realization that they were incapable of taking any responsibility. "I didn't destroy anything, Marta. I protected my family and my home. You tried to take advantage of my goodwill and my age. What you reap is what you sow. Goodbye." I hung up before she could respond. My heart was pounding, not with anger, but with a definitive certainty. I had done the right thing. That night I told Anna about the call. She listened quietly, stirring her plate of food. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "They'll never learn. For them, it's always someone else's fault." At that moment, I saw that the last tie that bound her to that family had been broken. She felt no pity, only a sad realization. From that day on, something changed in her. The determination in her eyes grew stronger. She started looking for jobs in the city, making plans. The little guest house had been a cocoon, and the butterfly was ready to fly. A month later, she arrived with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "I did it, Dad. I got a job. It's a good start, and I found a small apartment to rent. Close to work." I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of immense pride and the melancholy of her departure. "That's wonderful, my daughter," I said, hugging her. "But you know you can stay here as long as you want." "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. "And I'll never forget what you've done for me. You didn't just give me a roof over my head, Dad. You gave me back my strength. But now, I need to build my own refuge." Helping her pack her things was bittersweet. The little house that had become her home was becoming empty again. But this time, the emptiness was not one of conflict, but of a cycle coming to an end. When the last box was placed in her car, she handed me the key. "Take good care of our little castle," she joked. "It's stronger than it looks." We said goodbye with a long, tight hug. I stood on the porch watching her car disappear down the dirt road, just as I had done on the day of that horrible fight. But this time the dust that rose did not taste of defeat, but of hope. That night I walked to the little house and opened the door. It was clean and tidy. Anna's scent was still in the air. I looked at the small kitchen, at the maid bed, and no longer saw a trap or a weapon. I saw the place that saved my daughter, the place where she found herself again. I returned to the main house, to my sanctuary. I sat in Helena's rocking chair and looked out at the vastness of the forest. The peace I felt was profound, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the peace of solitude, but the peace of having done what was right, however difficult it may have been. I had protected my home, my memories, and most importantly, my daughter's future. My father's legacy wasn't about owning a piece of land. It was about having a place where your heart could always return, and I had ensured that Anna, like me, would always have that. The tranquility that settled in after Anna's departure was different. It wasn't the watchful solitude of before, but a well-deserved calm. Autumn arrived, painting the trees in the woods with shades of gold and red. I spent my mornings in the workshop, repairing antique furniture, the smell of wood and varnish filling the air. The little house in the back remained empty, but it was no longer a haunted place. It was a silent monument to my daughter's strength. We spoke on the phone almost every day. Her voice sounded lighter, full of stories about her new job and the small joys of having her own space. She was rediscovering who she was, far from Daniel's shadow, and each of her laughs was a victory for me. I believed the war was over. I had protected my territory and the enemy had retreated. Peace, I thought, was the ultimate reward. But evil, once planted, has deep and stubborn roots. It doesn't die just because you've stopped watering it. It started with small, almost imperceptible things. One morning, I found the gate to the property open, the lock forced. I thought it was young people looking for a place to stay, and I reinforced the lock. A week later, one of my vegetable beds, which Helena cared for so lovingly, was trampled and destroyed during the night. There were no animal tracks, but heavy boots. A chill ran down my spine. This was no accident. It was a message. The sense of security I had worked so hard to rebuild began to crumble. Like a sandcastle hit by the tide, I felt watched again, and the peace I cherished so much began to taste bitterly of illusion. The final blow came on a Saturday morning. The sun had barely risen when I walked to my workshop, a cup of coffee in my hands, ready to work on an old dresser. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. The place was destroyed. My father's tools were scattered on the floor, broken. Unfinished projects representing hours of careful work were in pieces. And then I saw it. Helena's little rocking chair, which I was restoring with almost sacred care, had been split in half with an axe. That act of violence was not against the wood. It was against my soul. On top of the chair's wreckage lay a single photo of Anna, torn in half. I needed no further proof. Daniel had not accepted defeat. He wanted to break me, to destroy every piece of my world. The anger I felt was like a fire rising through my veins, hot and purifying. But underneath it, there was an icy fear. He hadn't attacked the main house, but my sanctuary, the place of my memories, and he had used Anna's image to threaten me. I picked up the phone and called her. I tried to keep my voice calm, but she immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Dad, what happened?" I told her about the workshop. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard something that surprised me. It wasn't fear in her voice, but cold fury. "He's crossed the line," she said, her voice firm. "He's not going to intimidate us. Not anymore. What are we going to do?" At that moment, I knew that the woman Daniel had tried to erase no longer existed. In her place was a warrior. I knew that calling the police would be useless. There was no concrete evidence linking Daniel to the act. He was too smart to leave obvious traces. His revenge was psychological, designed to torment me, and I realized that fighting him on the same level, with anger and violence, was exactly what he wanted. I needed a different weapon, one he wouldn't see coming. I called Ricardo, my friend, and explained the situation. He listened patiently. "Roberto Roberto, this kind of man doesn't understand the language of reason or the law. He only understands the language of power and humiliation. You can't fight him, you have to disarm him. Find what he fears losing the most and take it away from him. Ricardo's words echoed in my mind. What did Daniel value most? It wasn't Anna, and it certainly wasn't love. It was appearances, the image of success, the forced respect he demanded from others, the status his family name gave him. His arrogance was his greatest weakness. I began to think about all the conversations I had had with Anna, the things she mentioned in passing about Daniel's business. He was always bragging about his projects, his important contacts. It was all a facade, I always knew. But maybe there was some dirty truth hidden behind the curtain. I decided it was time to pull that curtain and see what I would find. My revenge would not be loud. It would be as silent as the falling leaves in the woods. I began to investigate, using the patience I had learned as a craftsman. I made some phone calls, searched for public records of his companies. I discovered that many of his projects were stalled or involved in minor legal disputes. He was a master at promising the world and delivering dust. The decisive step came when I remembered a name Anna once mentioned, Flavio, a former construction foreman whom Daniel fired after a big fight. It took me a few days to find him. He was working at a small construction company across town, a bitter man tired of being cheated. My son-in-law, Daniel, a calculating man, wanted to take me out of my house and move me in with his parents. What would you do in my place? Comment on what you think and share. I arranged to meet Flavio at a simple cafe. At first, he was suspicious, but when I explained who I was, his eyes lit up with an old anger. That man, he began, he's a crook. He builds with poor quality materials, doesn't pay his suppliers properly, and cheats his customers. He fired me because I refused to sign a false safety report for a construction project that was full of problems. Flavio had kept copies of everything, receipts for substandard materials, emails exchanged with Daniel, even photos of the compromised structure of the project. He was afraid to use it, fearing the influence of Daniel's family. But when he saw my determination, he decided it was time for the truth to come out. He handed me a folder full of documents. Make good use of this, he said. That man needs to pay for what he did. With the folder in my hands, I didn't feel euphoric, but rather a cold clarity. I had the weapon I needed. I didn't go to the police or the newspapers. My target was someone else. The next morning, I drove to the upscale neighborhood where Carlos and Marta lived. I asked to speak to Carlos alone. I sat in his luxurious living room, the folder on my lap. He looked at me with contempt, probably expecting me to ask him for something. Without saying a word, I opened the folder and spread the documents on his glass coffee table. Photos, emails, reports. He began to read, his face changing from arrogance to disbelief, and finally to panic. What is this? He stammered. This is slander. You know it's not, I replied calmly. Your son is a criminal. Not only did he destroy my daughter's life, but he also deceived dozens of people and put lives at risk with his greed. I could take this to the authorities right now. Your family name would be in the mud tomorrow. Think of your partners, your friends, your club. Think of the shame. Carlos turned pale. His castle of appearances was about to crumble. I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear Daniel had tried to impose on me. What do you want? He asked, his voice weak. I want your son to disappear, I said, looking him straight in the eye. I want him out of my life and, more importantly, out of my daughter's life forever. I want him to go somewhere so far away that he can never hurt us again. You're going to take care of it, or else everyone will know what kind of man you raised. He didn't hesitate. The fear for his family's reputation was much greater than any love he might have for his son. He just shook his head, defeated. I got up, left the documents on the table, and walked out without looking back. 2 weeks later, Anna called me. Dad, you won't believe it. Daniel is gone. His mother called me, crying, saying he was transferred to take care of a family business in another region far away. It looks like he won't be back anytime soon. I heard the relief in her voice. I didn't tell her the details of what I had done. I just said, that's great, my daughter. Now you two can finally have peace. That night, I went back to my workshop. The place was still a mess, but it no longer looked like a crime scene. It felt like a new beginning. I picked up the pieces of Helena's rocking chair and started putting them together. The work would be long and difficult, but I had all the time in the world. The peace I felt now was solid, real. It was a piece I had built myself with my own hands. I hadn't just repaired a chair. I had restored our world. The months that followed were like a long, calm breath after a desperate race. Spring arrived in the woods, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and the sound of birds building nests. Anna and I became closer than ever. She visited me on weekends, and we no longer talked about Daniel. We talked about the future. She was taking a gardening course, an old passion that Helena and she shared. Seeing her with her hands in the soil, planting flowers in her mother's old flower beds was like seeing life sprouting again in soil I thought was dead. The little house in the back became her little weekend refuge, a place of her own. I had my sanctuary, and she had hers. The balance seemed perfect. One day, while sorting through the mail, I saw a different envelope. There was no sender, just Anna's name written in elegant, shaky handwriting. I gave it to her when she arrived that afternoon. She opened it curiously, but her face closed as she read the first lines. It was a letter from Marta, Daniel's mother. My instinct was to snatch the paper from her hands and burn it. I saw it for what it was, the first tentacle of a monster that refused to die. But Anna looked at me, raising her hand. "Wait, Dad, let me read it." She read silently, her jaw tense. The letter was a lament. Marta spoke of loneliness, of shame. She said that Daniel was unhappy, that he had made mistakes, but that he was a good man at heart. And at the end, the poison. She asked Anna to forgive him, to reconsider, not to let a family be destroyed by a misunderstanding. "Misunderstanding?" Anna whispered, the words sounding like an insult. She crumpled the letter tightly. "He destroyed your workshop. He threatened me. He made me feel like a prisoner in my own life. And she calls that a misunderstanding?" The anger in her voice was the same as I felt, but there was something else, a deep sadness. "What do I do, Dad?" she asked. Her eyes filled with a confusion I hated to see. I wanted to say, ignore it, throw it away, pretend it never existed. But I looked at my daughter, who was no longer a frightened little girl. She needed to find her own answer, not follow my orders. "What does your heart tell you to do?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She was silent for a long time, staring at the ball of paper in her hand. "I need to respond," she said finally. "Not to her, to myself." The following week, Anna didn't write a letter. She called Marta. I was in the workshop, but I left the door ajar, unable to concentrate. I couldn't hear Marta's words, but I could hear Anna's tone. It was calm, firm, without hesitation. There was no crying, no anger. There was only a cutting clarity. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. When Anna hung up, she came to the workshop. There was a peace on her face that I hadn't seen in years. "I told her," Anna began, "that I was sorry for her pain, but that my life with Daniel was over. I said that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or going back. It means moving forward, and that's what I was doing. I asked her not to contact me anymore." She took a deep breath. She cried. She tried to argue, but I stood my ground. "I closed the door, Dad, and it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It was a relief." At that moment, I felt such immense pride that it barely fit in my chest. I had built a wooden house to be my refuge, but my daughter had built a fortress within herself. Life seemed to have found its course, like a river that finally flows around the last rock. The peace was real, palpable, but I learned that evil doesn't need an invitation to return. It just waits for an unlocked door. A few weeks later, Ricardo, my friend, called me. His voice was serious. "Roberto, I need to tell you something. I was in town taking care of some business and overheard a conversation. Daniel's family name came up. My stomach froze." "What was it?" I asked. "It seems that the family business they sent him to isn't going well. In fact, it's sinking, and his parents are in serious financial trouble. Carlos lost a lot of money in a bad investment. They're selling the house." The news did not bring me joy, just a bad feeling, like storm clouds forming on the horizon. Desperate people do desperate things. The blow came in a way I could never have predicted. It was a sunny Saturday. Anna was tending the garden, and I was sanding an old picture frame on the porch. A car I didn't recognize stopped in front of the gate. Carlos got out, alone. He looked older, his air of arrogance replaced by heavy weariness. He opened the gate, which was unlocked, and walked toward me. Anna got up, dirt still on her hands, and stood beside me. Her eyes were cautious. "Roberto," Carlos said, his voice hoarse. "Anna, I know I have no right, but I had to come." I said nothing. I just waited. "What happened to Daniel," he began, "was deserved. I understand that now. What he did was unforgivable, and what I did, being blind to his mistakes, was too." He looked at Anna, and for the first time I saw something that looked like regret in his eyes. "My wife, Marta, isn't well. Daniel's departure, the financial problems. She got sick. The doctors say it's stress, sadness." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't come to ask for money. I didn't come to ask you to take Daniel back. I came to ask for a favor. One last favor. Marta talks a lot about Helena. She remembers the days when they were young, friends. She has a box of old photos. She just wants to give them to you, Roberto. She feels she needs to close this chapter, to ask forgiveness from the memory of your wife." The story was so well told that it almost seemed true, but I looked beyond the words, to the desperation in that man's eyes. It was a ploy, a last, pathetic attempt to use guilt and compassion as weapons. It was Anna who responded. "I'm sorry about Marta's illness," she said, her voice full of genuine but firm compassion. "But my mother's memories are here, in this house, in my heart. They don't need anything else." Carlos looked at me, waiting for me to intervene. I just put my hand on Anna's shoulder. A gesture of silent support. He got the message. Final defeat was written all over his face. He turned and walked away. A man who had lost everything, not because of me, but because of his own pride. Seeing him leave gave me no pleasure. It only confirmed what my father always said. A man's foundation is not money or name, but character. And that family's foundation had always been rotten. That night, sitting on the porch, Anna and I watched the stars. The silence was comfortable. The war was finally over. Not with a bang, but with the whisper of a door closing forever. The peace that surrounded us was stronger than any wood, more lasting than any stone. It was the peace of those who know that their home is not just a place, but the people who protect it. And we had protected ours. A year passed. Life in the woods found a gentle rhythm, marked by the seasons. Helena's rocking chair was repaired, sturdy and strong on the porch, and I often sat there at dusk, feeling her presence in the breeze that rustled the leaves. Anna blossomed. The gardening course had become a small business. She designed gardens for people in the city, bringing color and life to concrete spaces. But her real project was the garden at our house. She restored the flower beds Helena loved, planting the same flowers, and every weekend the house was filled with their scent. Peace was something I could feel in the air, like the smell of the earth after rain. It was a solid peace, built on truth and courage. We no longer spoke of the past. We didn't need to. It had become a scar, a reminder of a wound that had finally closed. It was on an autumn afternoon that the phone rang. It was Ricardo. His voice, usually cheerful, was subdued. "Roberto, I need to see you. Can I come over?" An hour later, we were sitting in my kitchen with 2 cups of coffee on the table. He got straight to the point. "I know you don't want to hear about these people anymore," he began, "but I think you need to know. Their situation has gotten much worse." I waited silently. "Carlos lost everything, Roberto. That bad investment was just the beginning. He had to sell the company for a pittance to cover the debts. The luxury house was sold. They are living in a small rented apartment in a much simpler area of the city." He paused. "And Marta, her illness wasn't a lie. She's really sick. They say she barely gets out of bed." I processed the information without feeling anything, neither joy nor pity. It was like reading a newspaper story about strangers. "What about Daniel?" I asked, the only question that mattered. Ricardo shook his head. "That's where it gets worrying. No one knows where he is. He disappeared after his parents lost everything. He just vanished. Carlos doesn't talk about his son." The news left a bitter taste in my mouth. A man with nothing to lose is a wild animal, and I knew that somewhere, that animal was licking his wounds and blaming us for his downfall. Life went on, but a small seed of apprehension was planted in me. I became more vigilant. I locked the gate at night, something I never did before. I paid more attention to the cars passing by on the dirt road. Anna didn't notice my uneasiness, and I made sure it stayed that way. She was happy, and I wasn't going to be the thief of her peace. But every night before going to sleep, I would look out the window into the darkness of the woods, half expecting to see a shadow that didn't belong there. Peace, I realized, is not a stone fortress. It is a garden, and gardens need to be cared for, protected from pests that can return when you least expect it. The pest returned on a rainy Friday night. Anna had stayed for the weekend. We were having dinner when we heard a noise at the front gate, a metallic sound like something being forced open. I got up slowly, signaling Anna to be quiet. I went to the living room window and looked through the curtain. Under the dim light of the porch, a thin, hunched figure was struggling with the gate chain. He was wearing a hood, but I recognized him immediately. It was Daniel. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a ghost, soaked and desperate. He finally managed to break the lock and entered the property, walking slowly toward the house, his eyes fixed on the light from our window. "Dad, what's wrong?" Anna whispered, coming up behind me. "It's him," I said. "Stay here and call the police. Don't come out for anything." I grabbed a heavy flashlight I kept near the door, the closest thing to a weapon I had. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the cold rain hitting my face. "Daniel?" I called, my firm voice cutting through the sound of the rain. He stopped a few feet away, lifting his face. I was shocked by what I saw. He was much thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a vacant, lost look. "Roberto," he said, his voice hoarse and weak. "I didn't come to hurt anyone." "Then what do you want?" I asked, keeping my distance. I need help," he stammered. "Everything went wrong. Everything. My parents, they blame me. They kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I haven't eaten properly in days." The story was pathetic, and maybe it was even true, but I felt no compassion. I only saw manipulation, the same old tactic, just with a different disguise. He was no longer wearing an expensive suit, but the cloak of pity. "There's nothing for you here," I said, cold as steel. "That door is closed forever." "Please," he insisted, taking a step forward. "It's because of you that my life is over. You owe me that. A chance. Some money to start over." The door to the house opened behind me. It was Anna. She had the phone in her hand, but she wasn't talking to the police. "No, Daniel," she said, her voice clear and strong, without a hint of fear. "We don't owe you anything. You made your choices. You lied. You cheated. You threatened. You destroyed everything you touched. The life you have now is the house you built yourself." Daniel's face contorted into a mask of hatred. The facade of victimhood fell away, revealing the monster that had always been there. "You," he growled, "always hiding behind your daddy. You're weak." "No," Anna replied, stepping forward to stand beside me. I'm not anymore." At that moment, in the distance, we heard the sound of a siren approaching. Anna had called the police. Despair took hold of Daniel's eyes. He looked at us, then at the road, and then made one last stupid choice. He ran, not toward the road, but into the dark, rainy woods. He stumbled and fell, getting up covered in mud and disappearing among the trees. The police arrived minutes later. We explained what had happened. They did a quick search, but Daniel had already disappeared into the vastness darkness of the forest. "He won't get far," said one of the officers. "We'll find him." They never found him. Daniel became a ghost, a story of a man who was swallowed up by the darkness he himself had cultivated. That night after the police left, Anna and I sat in silence on the porch, listening to the rain stop. The war hadn't ended with a door closing. It had ended with a man running into the night, pursued by himself, and we were finally free. The peace that followed was not only solid, it was definitive. It was the peace of a clear sky after the longest of storms. 2 years passed. Time in the woods did not run. It simply flowed, like the water of the stream over the smooth stones. Daniel's absence was not a void, it was a clean space, filled with the sound of birds and the smell of wet earth. His story became a distant whisper, a ghost that the sunlight had driven away forever. The police closed the case. He was declared missing, probably a victim of his own despair in the immensity of the forest. To the world, he was a statistic. To us, he was silence. Anna picked herself up in a way that filled me with quiet pride. Her small gardening business grew. She had a special talent for finding the soul of a garden, for understanding what each space needed to breathe. She spent her days in the city, transforming balconies and backyards, but her weekends were sacred, dedicated to our home. Helena's garden came back to life with an intensity that even I didn't remember. Roses climbed the trellises, lavender perfumed the air, and herb beds attracted bees and butterflies. The house was no longer just my refuge, it was ours. Sometimes I would receive news from Ricardo. Carlos and Marta sold their small apartment and moved to a distant city to live with a relative. They left quietly, erasing their footprints from our lives. The news brought me nothing, neither relief nor satisfaction. They were just people who had passed through our history, like a storm that breaks a few branches but leaves the main tree standing. I had found the peace that my father always said was a man's greatest treasure, a simple peace made up of routine, manual labor and the serene company of my daughter. I believed that the war was truly over, but I learned that ghosts sometimes don't need a body to haunt. It started with small, almost imperceptible things. A tool that I was sure I had left on the workshop bench appeared on the floor. The gate chain, which I always left one way, was coiled another way. At first, I blamed my own age. At 67, memory begins to play tricks. I laughed at myself, writing things down so I wouldn't forget. But then, one night, while I was on the porch, I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched. I looked into the dense darkness of the woods, where the light from the house didn't reach, and saw nothing. But the chill down my spine was real. I didn't tell Anna anything. Her peace was too precious to be tainted by an old man's paranoia. Weeks passed, and the feeling intensified. Once I found footprints at the edge of the stream in a muddy area where no one usually went. They were boots, bigger than mine. I thought of hunters, but something told me that wasn't it. I started locking the workshop at night, checking the windows twice before going to sleep. The peace I had built began to seem fragile, like thin glass in front of a rock. The ghost of Daniel, whom I believed had been swallowed up by the forest, seemed to be returning, not as a man, but as a presence, a silent threat lurking in the shadows. The confirmation came on a Saturday afternoon. Anna was in town on a big project and wouldn't be back until the next day. I was working on a small wooden box, a gift for her. The sun was setting, painting the sky with warm colors. That's when I heard a noise coming from the old shed at the back of the property, where I kept firewood and old tools. I stood still. The sound repeated itself, a metallic dragging. My heart raced. I grabbed a heavy crowbar, feeling the cold iron in my hand. I went out the back door of the workshop and walked slowly, using the trees as cover. The shed door was ajar. I peered through the crack, and my blood ran cold. There was a man inside, thin, dirty, with long, tangled hair and a beard that covered his face. He wore torn and patched clothes. He was rummaging through a box of old tools, breathing heavily and hungrily. For a moment I didn't recognize him. He looked like a wild animal, a man the forest had swallowed and spat back out, transformed. But then he turned toward the dim light coming through the crack, and I saw his eyes. They were Daniel's eyes, the same cold calculation now mixed with desperate madness. He was no longer a ghost, he was real, and he was living on my property, hiding, watching me. My first instinct was to scream, to confront him, but the man I saw was not the Daniel I knew. This was a cornered, unpredictable animal. I returned silently to the house, locked the door, and called the police. I explained the situation, my voice calmer than I felt. They said they would send a patrol car, but that it might take a while because of the distance. I knew I couldn't just wait. That man, living there, was a time bomb. He wasn't just stealing tools, he was waiting, and I knew what he was waiting for. Revenge. When I looked out the window again, he was no longer in the shed. The door was wide open. Panic struck me. Where was he? Did he know I had seen him? That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Not wood smoke, but a strong, chemical smell. I ran to the living room window, which faced the front of the house, and then I saw it. Daniel was on the porch. My porch. He was pouring liquid from a gallon jug around Helena's rocking chair. Gasoline. His movements were quick, feverish. He wasn't going to wait for nightfall. He was going to burn everything down now. I threw open the door. "Daniel!" I shouted. He turned, startled. His face was a skull covered with skin. "You!" he growled. his voice like the scraping of stones. "You couldn't leave me alone, could you? You had to take everything from me." He raised the jug, threatening to throw the rest at me. "It's over, Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, the crowbar secure in my hand. "The police are coming. Don't make things worse." "Worse?" He laughed. A broken, insane sound. "It can't get any worse than this. I've lived like an animal for 2 years, eating whatever I could find, sleeping in the cold, all because of you. Now you're going to feel what it's like to lose everything." He threw the jug aside and took a lighter out of his pocket. At that moment, I didn't think. I acted. I ran towards him. He was faster, but weaker. He tried to light the lighter, but I hit him with the crowbar on his arm. He screamed in pain, and the lighter fell on the gasoline-soaked wooden floor. We both stared at the small flame that instantly burst into life. The fire spread with frightening speed, climbing up Helena's chair, licking the walls of the house I had built with so much love. The horror paralyzed us for a second. Daniel looked at the fire, then at me, the hatred in his eyes turning to pure panic. He tried to run, but tripped over the empty gallon jug. He fell backward, hitting his head hard on the porch floor. The fire was closing in on him. For a moment, part of me wanted to leave him there, to be consumed by his own evil. But that wasn't who I was. I dropped the iron bar, grabbed him by the arms, and dragged him away from the flames, onto the lawn. He was unconscious. That's when the sirens finally arrived. The firefighters controlled the fire before it consumed the entire house. The balcony was destroyed, a black stain of charcoal where memories once were. The police took Daniel away, who was treated and then arrested. That night, sitting in the kitchen staring at the blackened door, I felt no victory. I felt a deep tiredness that came from my soul. The war was really over, not with a whisper, but with the roar of the fire. And when Anna arrived the next morning and hugged me amid the wreckage, I knew that peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the strength to rebuild. Together, we would pick up every burnt board, every bent nail, and build again, not just a house, but our future, on the ashes of a past that had finally fallen silent forever. The dust from the fire still hung in the air when Anna arrived. The smell of burnt wood and sadness was strong. She said nothing, just ran and hugged me. We stood there, amid what was left of the porch, for a long time. Her embrace was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to smoke. I felt her shoulders shake, but she didn't cry. Anna had always been strong, even when her heart was broken. At that moment, I wasn't a father comforting his daughter. We were just two people holding on to each other so we wouldn't fall apart. The house, my sanctuary, was wounded but not dead. And as I held my daughter, I knew that we weren't dead either. We were just starting to fight again. The following days were difficult. Cleaning up the debris was like touching an open wound. Every piece of charred wood was a memory. Helena's rocking chair had turned into a pile of ashes. I gathered what was left with my hands, feeling the rough, cold texture. Anna worked silently beside me. We didn't need words. Our grief and determination were shared in the rhythm of our work. A police officer named Sergio came by a few times to take my statement and update me on the case. Daniel was in custody, awaiting trial. He confessed everything in an outburst of hatred and self-pity. According to the police officer, he showed no remorse. The news brought me no peace, only emptiness. His evil needed no explanation. It simply existed. One night, while we were having dinner in the kitchen, the only part of the house that the smell of smoke hadn't completely taken over, Anna finally spoke. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "I should have seen it. I should have listened to you, protected you from him." Her eyes filled with tears. I reached across the table and held her hand. "You're not to blame for anything, my daughter. Evil hides well. He deceived you because you have a good heart and don't expect the worst from people. That's a quality, not a flaw." She shook her head. "But he almost destroyed everything. He almost took you away from me." I squeezed her hand tighter. "Almost. But he didn't. And he won't. We are stronger than the ashes he left behind." At that moment, I saw the same strength Helena had in Anna's eyes. The strength of a flower growing in a crack in the rock. Over time, the damage to the house began to heal. We hired a carpenter, an older man named Roberto, who knew wood like few others. He looked at the structure, at the beams I had put in myself, and nodded respectfully. "The heart of the house is good," he said. "Strong. We can rebuild the porch even better than before." Working with Roberto was therapeutic. He didn't ask many questions. He talked about trees, about the right way to cut a board, about the patience that wood requires. I worked alongside him, learning, teaching, and feeling life return to my hands. Anna came on weekends, no longer to tend the garden, but to sand, paint, and help lay the new porch floor. She brought a small radio, and we worked listening to music, filling the silence with notes of hope. Ricardo, my old friend, also showed up. He brought tools and a simple lunch. He spent the day helping without saying much about what had happened. He was just there, offering the silent strength of friendship. He told me that the news about Daniel had spread. Carlos and Marta were never seen or heard from again in the region. They disappeared, taking with them their shame or indifference. I would never know. It was better that way. Their story in our lives had come to a definitive end. There were no more loose ends, just the work ahead of us. Each nail I hammered was a full step stop in a chapter of pain. Each new board we laid was the first line of a new paragraph. Daniel's trial took place months later. I didn't go. Neither did Anna. We didn't need to relive that. The lawyer informed us that he had been sentenced to a long prison term for arson, trespassing, and attempted assault. His insanity was not enough to free him from responsibility. He was a broken man consumed by his own poison. I felt nothing for him, neither hatred nor pity. He was just a ghost who would no longer haunt us. His story was over. Ours, however, was being rewritten with the smell of new pine and fresh varnish. The house was breathing again, and so were we. Finally, the day arrived. The porch was ready, more beautiful and stronger than before. Alberto had suggested using a more resistant wood with a warm color. The afternoon sun hit it, creating a golden glow. To celebrate, Anna brought 2 new rocking chairs, almost identical to Helena's. We placed them side by side, facing the woods. She made tea and we sat down, rocking slowly, in unison. Silence returned, but this time it was a good silence, a peaceful silence. The stream flowed nearby, the same sound Helena loved. Anna's lavender perfumed the air. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Dad?" she said after a while. I looked at her face, lit up by the sun. She was smiling, a genuine smile that finally reached her eyes. "Yes, my daughter, it's very beautiful," I replied. The house was no longer just my refuge, and it wasn't just ours. It was a testimony, a testament that love is stronger than hate, that light always finds a way through the darkness. My father taught me that a man needs a place he can always return to, but he forgot to mention the most important part. That place is not made only of wood and nails. It is made of the people we love and who help us rebuild, no matter how many times the storm tries to knock us down. There, next to my daughter, on the reborn porch, I finally understood that true peace was not the absence of war. It was the certainty of having someone to fight with and then rest with, and that peace I knew no one could ever take away from me again. My house in the woods, built with love and memories, almost became a battlefield. What did you think of this outcome? Sign up for more intense stories like mine.